New England cold snaps that seemed to turn every breath into glass. Travelers in wool coats hurried past, their rolling suitcases clattering on the tiled floor, their eyes focused on departures, reunions, and holiday escapes. But amid the rush of polished shoes and the blur of scarves, there was a small figure that most overlooked. 9-year-old Lily Carter stood barefoot in shoes so thin they might as well not exist, her shoulders lost inside a faded gray coat. In her arms, she clutched a bundle of newspapers, the ink smudged from melting flakes. Beside her, crouched on a broken suitcase like a bird hiding from the wind, was her 5-year-old brother, Ethan. His lips were blue, and he pressed his small hands together for warmth, staring at the floor as though afraid to meet the eyes of the world. "Paper for 10 cents, Lily whispered, her voice almost stolen by the gale that pushed through the open platform doors. "Please, today's paper, 10 cents. No one stopped. Not at first. The commuters had mastered the art of indifference, the way city people do. Their eyes skipped over Lily as if she were part of the station's brick wall or one of the shadows stretching beneath the iron arches. Then came laughter. A group of young men, maybe in their 20s, swept onto the platform with the swagger of wealth. Their wool coats were lined with mink, and their shoes gleamed even in the dim light. One of them reached out, snatched a newspaper from Lily's trembling hands, and waved it like a flag. "Look at this," he sneered, tearing the paper down the middle. "Little beggar girl thinks she's the Wall Street Journal." The others chuckled, tossing scraps of newsprint into the air like cruel confetti. Ethan whimpered and buried his face in his sister's coat. Lily did not cry. She stood stiff, her knuckles white against the last few papers she still held. Her chin lifted as though she could swallow her pride and wear it like armor. "Please, that was today's edition," she murmured. "It cost me—" Her words dissolved as another sheet was ripped and cast into the wind. The pages fluttered down the platform, skidding across the icy tiles until they lodged against a bench leg. The men's laughter echoed like a jeer in a coliseum. And then it stopped. A shadow fell across them, tall, imposing, unbending. Jonathan Reed stood there, his black wool coat sweeping down to his polished shoes, his dark hair sprinkled with snow. At 32, Jonathan carried the kind of authority that silenced rooms before he ever spoke. A New York CEO traveling back from a meeting in Boston, he was not the sort of man accustomed to detours. But something in the sight of the trembling boy and the girl with her newspapers had cut deeper than a boardroom betrayal ever could. "Is this your entertainment?" His voice was steady, almost quiet, yet it carried across the platform. The group of young men froze, their smirks faltering as they met his gaze. Jonathan's eyes were sharp, steel gray, the kind that weighed a person down until they questioned every inch of themselves. One by one, they looked away. The leader muttered something about catching their train, and within seconds they had disappeared into the crowd, leaving the scraps of paper behind like dirty snow. Jonathan bent down, gathering the torn pieces with his gloved hands. When he looked up, Lily was staring at him, not with gratitude, but with suspicion. Her eyes were too old for her face. The eyes of someone who had already learned that kindness often came with strings. "You don't have to pick those up," she said, her voice rough from the cold. "They won't pay for them anyway." Jonathan held the crumpled pages in silence for a moment. Then he set them gently back into her basket. "No one should treat you like that," he said simply. Ethan peeked out from behind his sister's coat, his teeth chattering. Jonathan noticed the boy's shoelaces undone, his socks thin as paper, his knees shaking. Something twisted in his chest, something he hadn't felt since he was a boy himself, standing in the silent corridors of his father's mansion after his mother's funeral. He knew that look. Hunger mixed with shame, the ache of being forgotten by a world too busy to care. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Lily straightened her shoulders, guarding her brother like a soldier with a shield. "We're fine," she said. But Jonathan had heard that lie before. He had spoken it once, long ago, when he was barely older than her. The wind howled through the station again, scattering the last scraps of newsprint into the dark. Travelers continued to rush by, blind to the quiet war being fought at the corner of the platform, between pride and need, between suspicion and trust, between a girl who had only ever known survival and a man who was just beginning to remember what compassion felt like. Jonathan didn't move. Not yet. He simply stood there, his hands still in his gloves, his gaze steady. He knew that in this fragile moment, words mattered. One wrong sentence, one misplaced kindness, and she would vanish into the crowd, lost again. "Listen," he said finally, lowering his voice to the tone one might use with a skittish bird. "There's a little cafe inside the station. Warm food, hot cocoa, no tricks, no one asking for anything. Just warmth, that's all." Lily's lips tightened. She looked at her brother, at his pale face and trembling hands. Ethan glanced up at her with wide eyes, hope flickering like a candle. The train whistle blew in the distance. Jonathan glanced once toward the tracks, his own departure calling, but he didn't move toward it. For the first time in years, business could wait. Because here, in the snow and torn newspapers, was something far rarer than any deal he could sign. A chance to step into a story that was not about profit or power, but about the quiet salvation of two children who had been left behind. Lily's shoulders sagged ever so slightly. Her pride had carried her this far, but Ethan's shivering was louder than her defiance. "All right," she said at last, her voice barely audible. "Just for him." Jonathan nodded. He offered no smile, no triumphant gesture. He simply extended a hand, steady and patient, waiting for her to choose. And when Lily placed her small, cold fingers in his gloved palm, Jonathan Reed knew this night would mark the beginning of a story neither of them could yet imagine. A story written not in ink on paper, but in trust, sacrifice, and the fragile warmth of family. The cafe was tucked into a corner of South Station, its fogged windows glowing like lanterns against the night. Outside, the wind still howled, rattling the glass panes, but within, warmth and the smell of cinnamon clung to the air. Jonathan held the door open as Lily stepped in first, dragging her brother by the hand. Ethan's eyes widened at the sight. Polished counters, rows of pastries dusted with sugar, and the hiss of milk steaming from the espresso machine. For a moment, he forgot to shiver. Lily did not. She kept her chin high, suspicion etched into every line of her face. Her coat dripped melted snow onto the tiled floor, and the bundle of newspapers, now damp and wrinkled, was clutched to her chest as though it were her last shield. "Sit anywhere," Jonathan said gently, gesturing to an empty booth near the window. Lily hesitated, her eyes darting to the exit as if to measure how quickly she could escape. Ethan tugged at her sleeve. "Lily," he whispered, "please." Reluctantly, she led him to the booth. She slid into the seat, tucking Ethan beside her. Their thin bodies barely dented the cushions. Jonathan sat across from them, folding his coat neatly over the bench. The sight was almost absurd. A man who had commanded corporate boardrooms across New York, now sitting across from two children who had nothing but newspapers and pride. The waitress arrived, a tired woman with kind eyes. Jonathan ordered without hesitation. 3 hot cocos, extra whipped cream, and... He paused, glancing at the children. 2 grilled cheese sandwiches. Make them warm. The woman nodded and disappeared. Silence filled the booth. Jonathan studied Lily in the glow of the overhead lamp. Her brown hair was damp, clinging to her cheeks. Her hands, though small, were steady as she arranged the stack of papers beside her, as though proving to him that she was still working, still holding her ground. "You didn't have to buy us food," she said finally. Her tone was clipped, defensive. "We can take care of ourselves." Jonathan leaned back. "I don't doubt that. You've done more in 9 years than most adults would dare." She blinked, uncertain how to respond. Ethan leaned forward eagerly, his little hands spread on the table. "Is it really free?" he asked. Jonathan met his gaze. "It's not charity. Think of it as warmth, borrowed on a cold night." The boy smiled faintly, reassured. Lily frowned, unconvinced, but she did not argue. The food arrived quickly. Steam curled from the mugs, carrying the scent of chocolate so rich it seemed to wrap around them. Ethan reached first, his small fingers barely able to hold the cup. He took a sip and closed his eyes in delight, a trace of whipped cream smudging his lip. For the first time that evening, a quiet laugh escaped him. Jonathan watched, his chest tightening. It had been years since he'd seen such unguarded joy, pure, uncalculated, the kind of joy that had no price tag. Lily lifted her own mug with deliberate caution. She sniffed it first, as though searching for hidden motives. Then she took a sip. The warmth spread through her, softening the chill that had lived in her bones for so long. She tried to hide it, but the corners of her mouth betrayed her, twitching upward despite her will. Jonathan saw it. He did not mention it. Instead, he opened the folded newspaper lying on the edge of the table, a copy he had purchased earlier in the day. He spread it flat, smoothing the creases with his hand. "Do you read these often?" he asked. Lily's eyes narrowed. "Of course, I sell them. People like to ask what's inside, so I remember the headlines." "Headlines?" Jonathan repeated. He tapped the page, his finger resting on a dense column of text halfway down. "What about this?" Without hesitation, Lily leaned forward and recited, "The governor announces an increase in infrastructure spending for the Massachusetts Turnpike, with funds allocated to repair bridges along the Worcester stretch." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. She hadn't just read the headline. She had repeated the article nearly word for word. "You memorized it," he said quietly. Lily shrugged. "Words stick. Numbers, too. That's all." Ethan beamed with pride. "She can remember everything, even whole books. She read me Charlotte's Web once, without the book." Lily hushed him quickly, her cheeks coloring. She turned back to Jonathan, bracing herself. "If you're thinking you can use me to make money, don't bother. I'm not for sale." Jonathan's expression softened. "That's not what I was thinking." Her suspicion lingered, but her gaze faltered for just a moment. In that pause, Jonathan saw it. The fierce determination of a child who had lost too much, too soon. She carried herself like a guardian, not a girl. "I don't want your pity," she added. "You won't get it," Jonathan replied evenly. "But you will get respect." The words settled between them like a fragile truce. Outside, trains screeched against tracks slick with ice. Commuters hurried past the windows, their scarves whipping in the wind. Inside, the booth glowed with the warmth of cocoa, sandwiches, and the fragile beginnings of trust. Jonathan sipped his own cocoa, letting the sweetness spread over his tongue. He thought of his own childhood, of a mother's gentle hand turning the pages of bedtime stories, and then of the silence that followed her absence. He remembered standing in marble halls where his father's footsteps echoed like judgment, and how he had promised himself never to feel weak again. And yet here, with 2 children who had nothing but each other, he felt something stirring that all his wealth and boardroom victories had never given him. A sense of purpose. "Lily," he said finally, "where's home?" Her shoulders stiffened. She glanced at Ethan before answering. We don't have one. Not anymore. The truth hung in the air like frost. Jonathan did not press further. He simply nodded, as though she had shared something sacred. Ethan, already sleepy from the warmth and full stomach, leaned against his sister's side. His eyelids drooped, his breath softening. Lily brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, her touch tender, protective. Jonathan watched quietly. In that moment he understood. The girl across from him was not a child to be pitied. She was a soldier, a guardian, a mind sharp as glass hidden behind torn shoes and ink-stained fingers. And for reasons he could not yet name, Jonathan Reed knew he would not walk away from this station untouched. The train back to New York hummed steadily through the darkness, its windows fogged by the warmth inside and the frost pressing from without. Jonathan sat alone in his compartment, his reflection staring back at him from the glass. Sharp suit, controlled expression, but behind the polished veneer, an unease he could not shake. On the small table before him lay a folded newspaper, the same issue Lily had recited by heart in the cafe. He had tucked it into his briefcase after leaving the children at the station with a few bills discreetly slipped into Lily's basket. He had intended it as a gesture of dignity, not charity. Yet the image of her wary eyes and Ethan's sleepy trust lingered long after the whistle of departure. Jonathan leaned back, closing his eyes. For a man who had trained himself to measure every thought in terms of profit and risk, it was disconcerting how quickly two strangers had unsettled his balance. He could still hear Lily's voice, steady and precise, repeating the article with perfect memory. Not just words, cadence, punctuation, the subtle rhythm of journalism itself. A child with such recall was not merely surviving, she was extraordinary. But extraordinary often went unseen. He knew that too well. His mind drifted backward, against his will, to a winter decades past. He was 12 when the illness took his mother. The memory was sharp. The hush of nurses in starched uniforms, the scent of antiseptic in the hospital corridor, and his father's silence, a silence more terrifying than grief itself. Jonathan remembered standing in the grand foyer of their Westchester estate after the funeral, staring at the endless marble floor. His father had returned to business within days, barely acknowledging the boy who wandered those echoing halls. The staff whispered that Jonathan would toughen up, that this was the way of the Reed family. Vulnerability was a liability. So Jonathan learned to seal his wounds behind ambition. He sharpened his mind, devoured textbooks, outpaced classmates, and by 24 he was already climbing the rungs of Wall Street. Success became his armor, boardrooms his battlefield. Yet beneath the tailored suits, the boy who had once craved a mother's touch still lived, restless, unseen. Now, in the rhythmic rattle of the train, that boy stirred again. Because when Jonathan had watched Lily press her small frame between Ethan and the cruelty of strangers, he had seen himself, the lonely child who had stood guard over his own pain, protecting it from the world. The train lurched slightly, pulling into Stamford. Jonathan's phone vibrated on the table. The name flashing on the screen made his jaw tighten. Richard Davenport, chairman of Reed Holdings. He hesitated before answering. Richard. Jonathan. The older man's voice was crisp, each word polished like glass. I trust Boston was productive. As expected, Jonathan replied. The merger proposal with Fenwick Capital is moving forward. Good. The board will convene on Friday. This acquisition is critical. Our shareholders expect nothing less than decisive leadership. Jonathan glanced again at the newspaper on the table, at the faint smear of chocolate Lily had left on the page when she'd returned it to him. His hand lingered on it as Richard's voice pressed on. There's talk, Richard continued, that you've been distracted. A CEO of your stature cannot afford detours, Jonathan. Remember who you represent. Strength. Precision. Not sentiment. Jonathan's grip on the phone tightened. He heard again Lily's words from the cafe. "I'm not for sale." They had struck him with more force than he'd admitted. "I assure you," Jonathan said evenly. "My focus is intact." "See that it is," Richard replied. "The board tolerates no weakness." The call ended. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating. Jonathan set the phone down slowly, staring at his reflection once more. Weakness. That word had stalked him since boyhood. His father had wielded it like a blade, carving out any trace of vulnerability. But tonight, weakness had not been the image of a shivering girl selling newspapers. It had been the laughter of those who mocked her, the blindness of men who thought cruelty was strength. The train rattled on through the night. Jonathan picked up the newspaper, folded it with deliberate care, and slid it into the inside pocket of his coat. He could not name why, but he knew he needed to keep it. By the time the train pulled into Grand Central, dawn was bleeding into the sky, painting the skyline in streaks of gray and pink. Jonathan stepped into the city that had made him powerful, its towers glittering like cold sentinels. Yet as he entered the revolving doors of Reed Tower, something in his stride was altered. Inside, the marble lobby buzzed with the morning rush of executives, analysts, and assistants. They nodded as he passed, their eyes following him with practiced respect. Jonathan moved with the calm efficiency expected of him, yet beneath the surface his thoughts drifted back to Boston. In the boardroom that afternoon, the table gleamed under recessed lighting. The directors sat in their tailored suits, voices clipped and calculated. They spoke of numbers, projections, mergers, but Jonathan's attention fractured. He found himself glancing at a stray page in the briefing folder, an article about Boston's homelessness crisis. The words blurred into Lily's face, Ethan's trembling hands. "Jonathan," Richard's voice cut through, sharp as a gavel. "Your input?" Jonathan blinked, forcing himself back into the present. "Fenwick Capital's portfolio is overstated," he said, his tone measured. "Their infrastructure assets are fragile. If we absorb them, our liabilities could overshadow the gains within 3 years." The room shifted, murmurs rising. Richard narrowed his eyes. "That's a departure from your earlier assessment." "I've had time to reconsider," Jonathan replied smoothly. "We cannot gamble with reputations built over generations." It was the truth, though not the whole truth. The whole truth was that he had begun to see reputations differently. Once they had been shields against loneliness. Now they seemed paler than the fragile strength of a girl protecting her brother on a freezing platform. As the meeting ended, Jonathan returned to his office overlooking Madison Avenue. He stood at the glass wall, the city sprawling beneath him. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt hollow. On his desk lay a photograph he rarely touched. His mother, smiling at him on the lawn of their estate. He traced the edge of the frame with one finger. She had once told him that greatness was not measured in how high one climbed, but in how one lifted others. He had dismissed it then as motherly idealism. Now, her words echoed louder than the board's demands. Jonathan sank into his leather chair, rubbing his temples. He thought of Lily again, her defiant eyes, her quiet declaration. "We can take care of ourselves, but children should not have to." And as the sun sank behind the skyline, Jonathan Reed realized that his old wounds were not closed after all. They had been waiting, silent and patient, for a reason to reopen. That reason had found him in Boston, selling newspapers in the snow. The city was restless that evening, its avenues glimmering with neon and headlights. Jonathan had returned to New York, but Boston remained with him like a persistent echo. He could not erase the image of Lily's defiant gaze across the cafe table. In boardrooms and dinners with investors, her words kept breaking through the polished rhythm of corporate life. We can take care of ourselves." 3 days later, Jonathan found himself walking through the iron gates of St. Helena's School, a quiet campus in Greenwich Village, where the children of professionals and artists learned under ivy-covered walls. The school's headmistress, an elegant woman with silver hair and bright intelligence in her eyes, greeted him warmly. "Mr. Reed," she said, ushering him into her office. "You said you had 2 children in mind for scholarship consideration?" "Yes," Jonathan replied, his voice low. "A girl named Lily Carter, 9 years old, and her younger brother Ethan. They're gifted, though their circumstances have hidden it." The headmistress nodded. "Our endowment is strong. If what you say is true, we could place them with us immediately." Jonathan exhaled. It was the first concrete step he had taken since Boston, and it felt almost reckless, like risking reputation for something intangible. Yet something within him refused to turn back. That evening, he returned to South Station. He had not told his driver. He boarded a late train to Boston alone, carrying no luggage but resolve. When he arrived, snow was falling in lazy spirals, softening the city's hard edges. He found Lily and Ethan where he suspected they would be, near the platform, newspapers bundled at their feet, huddled together against the cold. "Back again?" Lily said when she saw him. Her eyes were guarded, her tone sharpened by suspicion. Ethan's face, however, lit up with recognition. "You!" Ethan exclaimed, running forward before Lily pulled him back. "You came back!" Jonathan crouched so his eyes met Lily's. "I have an offer," he said. "A scholarship at St. Helena's in New York. Both of you could attend. Housing, food, tuition, all covered." Lily's expression did not change. If anything, her defenses bristled higher. "We don't need charity," she said coldly. "We earn our own way." Jonathan studied her face, the way her jaw trembled, though her voice did not. He realized then that this girl's pride was not arrogance. It was survival. Pride was the one possession no one had managed to take from her. "Lily," he said carefully, "this isn't charity. It's recognition. Your mind deserves a place where it can grow, not freeze on a station floor." She crossed her arms. "And when you get bored of helping us, what then? We'll be tossed aside again. People always say kind things before they leave." Her words struck him like a blade. He remembered the echo of his father's footsteps, the silence after promises that never came. He forced himself to meet her glare. "I won't leave," he said simply. Silence stretched. The snow fell thicker now, muffling the noise of the station. Ethan looked between them, wide-eyed, sensing the storm between pride and hope. Finally, Lily spoke again, her voice lower, weighted with something raw. "I promised my mom before she died that I would take care of Ethan. She said he needs me more than anyone. If I let someone else take over, then I break that promise." Jonathan's chest tightened. There it was, the heart of her resistance. She wasn't only proud, she was carrying a vow carved into her very being. He leaned closer, his tone almost a whisper. "Keeping that promise doesn't mean refusing help. It means making sure Ethan is safe, educated, and warm. You are still his sister." Nothing will change that. But even the strongest guardians need allies. Lily's eyes shimmered, though no tear fell. She pressed her lips together, as if holding back emotion by sheer will. Ethan tugged her sleeve timidly. "Lily, I want to go. Just to try." Her shoulders quivered. She looked down at him, then back at Jonathan. "And if they laugh at us? If they say we don't belong?" Jonathan's voice was firm. "Then they'll answer to me." The conviction in his words startled even him, but he meant it with every fiber of his being. Lily studied him for a long moment, searching for cracks in his promise. Finally, she sighed, her breath clouding in the air. "One chance. That's all. For Ethan." Jonathan nodded. "One chance. For both of you." They walked together to the waiting cab. Lily held Ethan's hand tightly, as though afraid he might slip away. Jonathan kept a respectful distance, not forcing familiarity. But as the cab rolled away through Boston's snowy streets, he allowed himself a small, private breath of relief. Back in New York days later, Jonathan led the children into the gates of St. Helena's. The headmistress welcomed them warmly, showing Ethan the play yard and Lily the bright library filled with shelves that stretched to the ceiling. Lily stood in the doorway, hesitant. Jonathan watched her eyes widen as she traced the spines of books, history, science, poetry, each one a world waiting to be unlocked. For a moment, her guarded expression slipped, and wonder bloomed across her face. Then she remembered herself, pulling the armor back on. She turned to Jonathan. "I'll stay, but not because you said so. Because Ethan deserves it." Jonathan inclined his head. "Then we agree." That night, as he returned to his penthouse overlooking Madison Avenue, Jonathan poured himself a glass of water and stood at the window. The city lights stretched endlessly, but for once they did not feel lonely. Somewhere in Greenwich Village, 2 children had begun a new chapter. And though he would never admit it aloud, not yet, he knew they had begun one for him as well. The morning light spilled through the tall arched windows of St. Helena's library, gilding the oak shelves with gold. For Lily, it was a cathedral of words, each spine whispering secrets from worlds she had never touched. Ethan ran circles around the reading tables, giggling at the sound of his shoes squeaking on polished wood, but Lily stood still, wide-eyed, as though afraid the dream might dissolve if she breathed too loudly. Jonathan watched her from the doorway. He had come to speak with the headmistress, but his gaze lingered on Lily. There was something about the way her fingers traced the spines of books, hesitant yet reverent, that stirred a memory of his own mother's hand guiding his across pages when he was a boy. That afternoon, a visitor arrived. Professor Harold Whitman, a renowned cognitive psychologist from Columbia University, known for his work with gifted children. The headmistress, eager to confirm Jonathan's claims about Lily, had invited him. Professor Whitman was in his late 60s, his white beard trimmed neatly, his eyes bright with curiosity. He shook Jonathan's hand firmly before turning his attention to Lily. "So," he said, lowering himself to her level, "you're the young lady who memorizes newspapers." Lily stiffened, glancing at Jonathan as though he had betrayed her secret. Jonathan raised his hands gently. "I only mentioned what I saw," he assured her. Whitman smiled kindly. "Would you humor an old man and let me test a few things? No tricks, just games, really." Lily narrowed her eyes. "What if I don't want to play?" "Then we sit here and drink cocoa instead," Whitman replied with a shrug. "But I think you'll enjoy the puzzles." Ethan tugged his sister's sleeve eagerly. "Play, Lily. You're good at games." Reluctantly, she agreed. Whitman spread a series of cards across the table, each marked with patterns of shapes and numbers. At first, Lily approached cautiously, but soon her hands moved quickly, rearranging sequences, predicting patterns, solving logic puzzles before Whitman finished explaining the rules. "Again," she demanded after completing one in seconds. "Harder." Whitman chuckled, delighted. He produced memory tests, linguistic riddles, mathematical challenges. Lily devoured them all, her brow furrowed in concentration, her lips moving silently as though she were translating the universe itself. An hour later, Whitman sat back, stunned. He had administered dozens of assessments in his career, but rarely had he encountered a child whose intellect soared so effortlessly across every domain. Her recall was photographic, her reasoning instantaneous, her vocabulary vast. He turned to Jonathan, his voice low with awe. Her IQ is beyond 175. Off the charts. She isn't just gifted, she's extraordinary. Jonathan felt his chest tighten. He had suspected brilliance, but hearing it confirmed struck deeper than he expected. For years he had surrounded himself with experts, analysts, strategists, but none had impressed him as this 9-year-old girl had in a single afternoon. Lily, however, folded her arms and glared at both men. So what? Numbers don't matter. They won't put food on the table. Her words silenced the room. Whitman shifted uncomfortably, unused to such defiance. Jonathan leaned forward. Numbers may not put food on the table, he said softly, but they can open doors. Doors to places where you won't have to beg for warmth in a train station. Lily's eyes flared with resistance. Doors for people like you, maybe. Not for us. Jonathan swallowed, fighting the sudden rush of memory. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew an old photograph he kept hidden beneath documents. It showed a young boy, himself at age 12, standing stiffly beside his father at a company gala. His eyes were hollow, his suit too large, but beside him, clutched in his hand, was a folded newspaper, his mother's last gift before she died. Jonathan set the photograph on the table. Lily leaned closer, studying it with her sharp gaze. You, she whispered. That's you. Yes, Jonathan said. I carried newspapers once too. Not to sell, but to hold on to something that reminded me of her. My mother. She died when I was young. Lily's jaw tightened. My mom died too, but she cleaned offices, not hosted galas. Nobody cared when she was gone. Her voice cracked on the last word, though she tried to mask it with anger. Jonathan met her glare with steady eyes. I cared, because I know what it's like to lose the person who saw you, who believed in you. That's why I'm here, Lily, not to pity you, to tell you that your mind is rare, and it deserves more than a platform of snow and torn newspapers. For the first time, her eyes wavered. She glanced at Ethan, who was dozing on the chair, his head lolling to one side. The weight of responsibility pressed on her small shoulders like lead. Professor Whitman cleared his throat. Miss Carter, he said gently, you have the kind of mind that can change the world, but only if you allow yourself to step into it. Genius does not erase pain, but it can build futures. Lily looked away, blinking quickly. She did not answer. Jonathan gathered the photograph, sliding it back into his briefcase. He felt exposed, raw but strangely lighter. He had never shown that photo to anyone before. Now it belonged to her story, too. As evening fell, the children were led to their dormitory rooms, small but warm. Jonathan lingered outside, staring at the closed door. He had come to offer opportunity, but he realized he had received something too. A reminder of the boy he had been, and the man he still could become. Inside, Lily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her mind buzzed with numbers and patterns, but beneath it all was the echo of Jonathan's words. I know what it's like to lose the person who believed in you. She whispered into the darkness, almost inaudible. Mom, am I allowed to trust him? Only silence answered, but for the first time, Lily felt the question itself mattered. The city had shifted into January's unforgiving rhythm. Gray skies pressed low, and wind tunneled through avenues like a blade. Jonathan's days blurred into a cycle of boardroom meetings and strategy calls, but beneath the surface, something else was stirring. Each evening when he left Reed Tower, his car no longer drove straight to his penthouse. Instead, he often stopped by St. Helena's, lingering to see Lily and Ethan. It was during one of those visits that the first shadow appeared. Lily had been in the library, bent over a thick history book, when she stumbled upon a photograph tucked into an old newspaper archive. Her sharp eyes caught the name printed beneath: Reed Holdings Annual Gala, 2014. A young woman in the background of the image stood with a mop and bucket, blurred by the focus of the camera. Her heart seized. She knew that face. It was her mother. The library seemed to tilt. Memories surged. Her mother's tired hands after long shifts. Her hushed stories of being unfairly dismissed. The bitterness in her voice when she spoke of the cold corporate men who never saw her worth. And now, here it was. The company name. Reed. By the time Jonathan arrived at the school that evening, Lily's eyes were burning with fury she could barely contain. Ethan clung to her side, confused by the storm brewing in his sister's chest. Jonathan greeted them warmly, carrying a paper bag of pastries. "I thought you might like—" "Stop!" Lily snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut. She stood before him, fists clenched, her whole body shaking. "You knew." Jonathan froze. "Knew what?" "That my mom worked for your company," she shouted. Other children turned to stare, but she didn't care. "She was a janitor there. She told me she was fired for no reason, left to beg for scraps. And now you—" her voice cracked with anger. "Now you pretend to care?" Jonathan's chest tightened. He had not expected this, though he should have. Memories flickered, long-forgotten HR disputes, a wave of layoffs during restructuring years ago. He remembered none of the names, none of the faces. But one of them, he realized, had belonged to Lily's mother. He tried to speak, but Lily's rage poured forth like a dam broken. "You're just like the others," she spat. "The men in suits who ruined families without looking back. My mom cried every night. She said she gave everything and they threw her away. You let that happen. And now you act like some savior, handing out schools and sandwiches as if it fixes anything." Her words struck him harder than any boardroom challenge ever had. He saw his reflection in her fury, the boy he once was, furious at a father who had dismissed grief with silence. "Lily," Jonathan said softly, "I didn't know about your mother. I was not CEO then. But I should have known. I should have looked closer." But Lily was already pulling Ethan toward the door. "Save your excuses. We don't need you. We never did." Jonathan reached out but stopped himself. He could not chain her trust. It had to be chosen. That night, Jonathan sat alone in his penthouse, the city lights sprawling endlessly beyond the glass. He opened old company archives, searching through HR records from the year Lily's mother had been dismissed. There it was. Carter, Anna. Terminated due to downsizing. No mention of performance. No acknowledgement of loyalty. Just a cold, bureaucratic phrase. Jonathan pressed his forehead to his hand. He had built his empire on efficiency, never stopping to see the cost. And now, the cost stood before him in the form of a girl who despised him for the sins of a company he once served. Meanwhile, Lily lay awake in the dormitory bed, Ethan curled against her. The warmth of the school's blankets did not comfort her. Her mind burned with betrayal. She replayed every moment with Jonathan, his promises, his quiet patience, his talk of understanding pain. Was it all a mask? "Mom," she whispered into the dark, "I won't let him trick us. I won't let him erase what happened to you." The next morning, she avoided Jonathan. Days stretched into a tense silence. When he came by the school, she kept her distance, answering only with clipped words. Ethan was torn, drawn to Jonathan's warmth yet loyal to his sister's fire. Jonathan, however, did not retreat. He sent no gifts, offered no empty apologies. Instead, he began quietly investigating the old restructuring, speaking with long-retired managers, uncovering stories of workers discarded without care. The more he learned, the heavier his conscience grew. One evening, Jonathan found himself standing outside St. Helena's library, where Lily sat reading. He waited until the other children left, then stepped inside. She looked up, her eyes still hard. "I can't change what happened to your mother," he said quietly, "but I can tell you this. She was wronged. And if you let me, I will spend every day proving that I see you, not as a statistic, not as a burden, but as Lily Carter, a girl whose mind is a miracle, a sister whose heart is stronger than anything I've ever known." Her lips trembled, but she forced them still. "Words won't bring her back." "No," Jonathan admitted, "but they can shape what comes after. And I won't walk away, even if you hate me for what the company once did. That's my promise." Silence stretched between them. Lily turned back to her book, but her fingers shook as she turned the page. Jonathan left quietly, the vow still hanging in the air. That night, Lily whispered to herself in the dark, "I don't trust him. Not yet." But deep down, where her pride met her aching hope, she wondered if perhaps, just perhaps, he meant it. The boardroom of Reed Holdings was built to intimidate. Its table stretched the length of a bowling lane, carved from mahogany that gleamed beneath the recessed lighting. The windows overlooked Manhattan like a throne gazing down at its kingdom. On this bitter January morning, Jonathan sat at the head of the table, his posture calm but his blood surging beneath the surface. Richard Davenport, the chairman, cleared his throat. "Jonathan, there are rumors." His voice was precise, clipped. "About your extracurricular involvement with 2 homeless children. South Station, newspapers in the snow. You've been seen." The other directors exchanged glances, some curious, others disapproving. Jonathan's fingers tightened around the pen in his hand. "They're not rumors," he said evenly. "They're facts. Their names are Lily and Ethan Carter." The silence was sharp enough to slice marble. Richard leaned forward. "Do you realize what this looks like? A CEO entangled with street children? We are finalizing a billion-dollar merger. Appearances are everything." Jonathan met his gaze without flinching. "Appearances are not everything. Substance is." "Substance?" Richard snapped. "You risk your career, our shareholders, and the company's legacy for sentiment. A CEO cannot afford weakness." Jonathan's mind flashed to Lily's fury in the library, her accusations about her mother. She had not been wrong. If the company had discarded Anna Carter unjustly, then his legacy was already cracked. "I will not abandon them," Jonathan said. His voice carried a weight that hushed the room. "If that means losing this seat, then so be it." Gasps rippled around the table. A director muttered something about fiduciary duty. Richard's jaw tightened. "You would throw away Reed Holdings for 2 strays?" Jonathan's hand slammed against the table before he could stop himself. "They are not strays. They are children. And one of them is the most brilliant mind I've ever encountered. If this company cannot stomach compassion, then perhaps it does not deserve to carry my name." The room erupted in whispers. Richard's glare was icy. "Be careful, Jonathan. Heroes burn fast. We'll convene a vote if necessary." Jonathan rose from his chair, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest. "Do what you must. But understand this. If I lose this company, I'll walk away with something greater. Family." He left the boardroom, the echoes of his declaration ringing like church bells through his mind. For the first time in years, he felt strangely free. That night, Lily stood at the window of her dormitory room, her breath clouding the glass. She had overheard fragments from teachers whispering how Jonathan was under fire for his involvement with her and Ethan. The realization struck like lightning. She was the reason his career might crumble. Her heart twisted. She could not let him pay that price. "Pack your things," she whispered to Ethan. The boy blinked sleepily. "Why? I like it here." "We're leaving," Lily insisted, shoving their few belongings into a worn satchel. "He'll lose everything if we stay." "I won't let that happen." Ethan's lip trembled. "But I like Mr. Reed. He makes me feel safe." Lily's chest tightened. She wanted to say she did too, but the promise to her mother roared louder. Protect Ethan. Carry the burden. They slipped out after curfew, creeping through the silent corridors and into the snowy night. Their breath puffed in quick clouds as they hurried toward the city streets, the satchel banging against Lily's side. But Jonathan was already waiting. He stood beneath the lamppost outside the gates, his figure tall against the falling snow. His car idled nearby, headlights cutting through the darkness. Lily froze. Her heart thudded. "You were going to run," Jonathan said quietly, stepping forward. His expression was not anger, but sorrow. Lily lifted her chin defiantly. "If we stay, you'll lose your company. People are talking. I won't let you destroy yourself because of us." Jonathan crouched so his eyes were level with hers, his breath visible in the cold. "Do you think I built all of this just to hoard power? Lily, I've already had everything wealth can buy. None of it filled the emptiness." She shook her head fiercely. "We're not worth it." "Yes, you are." His voice broke with intensity. "If I lose Reed Holdings tomorrow but keep you and Ethan safe, I win. Do you understand? For the first time in my life, I would win." Tears pricked Lily's eyes, but she blinked them back, her pride refusing to surrender. "You don't know what you're promising." Jonathan reached out, not touching her, but letting his hand hover. An invitation, not a demand. "I know exactly what I'm promising. I will fight for you, even if it costs me everything." Ethan stepped forward, his small hand sliding into Jonathan's. "I believe him," he whispered. Lily's chest cracked under the weight of the moment. Her eyes darted between her brother's trust and Jonathan's steady gaze. Slowly, almost painfully, she let her satchel slip from her shoulder. "Fine," she murmured. "But if you break your word, we're gone." Jonathan nodded solemnly. "Then I will never break it." The snow fell silently around them, blanketing the city in white. For the first time, Lily allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't fighting this battle alone. Jonathan Reed had built his life on control. Markets obeyed his calculations, executives followed his command, and schedules bent to his discipline. Yet nothing in his carefully ordered world had prepared him for the chaos of caring for 2 children. It began with breakfast. Jonathan rose early one Saturday, determined to surprise Lily and Ethan with a home-cooked meal at his penthouse. He had dismissed the house staff for the day, insisting he could manage. Standing in the gleaming marble kitchen, he stared at the carton of eggs as though it were a hostile takeover. How hard could it be? Crack, whisk, pan. Simple. But the shells shattered into shards, yolk sliding down his cuff. He muttered under his breath, fumbling with the spatula. Moments later, smoke curled from the pan. "Is something burning?" Lily's voice came from the doorway. She stood in her pajamas, arms crossed, one eyebrow raised. Ethan peeked around her leg, giggling. Jonathan cleared his throat. "Breakfast." Looks more like arson, Lily said dryly. Ethan climbed onto a stool, his eyes wide with delight. Can I help? Jonathan hesitated, then handed the boy a whisk. Be my sous chef. Together they scrambled eggs, uneven, lumpy, but edible. When they sat at the table, Jonathan watched as Ethan devoured his plate, whipped cream from the cocoa smeared on his nose. Lily took a tentative bite, then against her will, allowed a small smile. Not bad, she conceded. Jonathan exhaled, oddly relieved. It wasn't the food that mattered. It was the laughter, the sound that filled corners of his penthouse long accustomed to silence. That evening he tried bedtime. He had purchased a stack of children's books, classics bound in bright covers. Sitting at the edge of Ethan's bed, he began to read Charlotte's Web. His voice, usually reserved for quarterly reports, stumbled over the whimsy of farm animals. But Ethan's eyes grew heavy, lulled by the rhythm. Lily lingered in the doorway, skeptical. You don't have to do this, she said softly. Jonathan closed the book halfway. Maybe not. But I missed having someone read to me, and he shouldn't miss it too. Something flickered in her expression, recognition, perhaps, of the boy hidden beneath the CEO. She didn't answer, but she stepped into the room and sat quietly on the other bed, listening as he continued. By the time he reached Wilbur's first cry of, "Some pig!" Ethan was asleep, and Lily's eyes were softer than he had ever seen them. But fatherhood was not all tenderness. On Sunday, Ethan spilled juice across Jonathan's leather briefcase, soaking important merger documents. Jonathan's instinct was to snap, decades of boardroom discipline surging to the surface. But he stopped when he saw Ethan's face crumple with fear. Instead, Jonathan crouched down, took the boy's hands, and said, "Papers can be replaced. You can't." Ethan's tears dried instantly. He threw his arms around Jonathan's neck with such fierce trust that Jonathan's throat closed. He held the boy tightly, realizing that power had never felt like this before. Not the kind written in contracts, but the kind that came from being needed. Days turned into a rhythm of awkward practice and quiet triumphs. Jonathan learned how to braid Lily's hair, badly, how to bandage Ethan's scraped knee, how to tell when silence meant Lily was lost in thought rather than angry. One evening, after a long day, he attempted to cook pasta. The noodles fused into a single lump. Lily rolled her eyes, took the spoon from his hand, and said, "You'd starve without me." Jonathan laughed, the sound surprising even himself. "Then I suppose I'm lucky you're here." For a moment, Lily froze, caught off guard by his sincerity. She turned quickly to the stove, hiding the warmth rising in her cheeks. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. It was late, the city glittering beyond the penthouse windows. Jonathan had fallen asleep on the sofa, still in his shirt and tie, papers strewn around him. Ethan padded into the room, dragging his blanket. He climbed onto the sofa, curled against Jonathan's side, and whispered through a yawn, "Good night, Dad." The word pierced Jonathan's sleep like a bell. His eyes opened slowly, disbelief flooding him. Ethan's small hand clutched his shirt, his breath steady with trust. Jonathan swallowed hard, his vision blurring. He had been called many things in his life, CEO, visionary, ruthless strategist, but never Dad. Carefully, he placed a hand over Ethan's back, steady and protective. "Good night, son," he whispered, his voice breaking. From the hallway, Lily watched silently. She had come to fetch Ethan, but when she saw the boy curled in Jonathan's arms, she paused. For once, she did not step in to pull her brother away. Instead, she leaned against the wall, her expression unreadable, half suspicion, half something softer, fragile. Perhaps she thought he really meant what he said. That night, Long after the children slept, Jonathan stood at the window of his penthouse, the city alive beneath him. He had risked his company, his reputation, everything he had built. But when he remembered the sound of Ethan's small voice whispering, "Dad," he knew he had chosen rightly. For the first time in decades, Jonathan Reed did not feel like an orphan of grief. He felt like a man on the threshold of something greater than power, family. The family courtroom in Lower Manhattan was far from the gleaming boardrooms Jonathan Reed was used to. The ceiling lights buzzed faintly, illuminating worn oak benches and walls scuffed by years of desperate hands. It was not a place of triumph, but of judgment. Jonathan sat at the respondent's table, his suit immaculate, yet his heart beat faster than it ever had before a billion-dollar merger. Across the aisle, representatives from the Department of Child and Family Services whispered among themselves, their briefcases stacked with reports. Their petition was simple. Lily and Ethan Carter should be placed in the foster system. Jonathan, they argued, was unfit, an unmarried CEO with no parental history, facing scandal for entangling his company with children from the street. But to Jonathan, this was not business. It was war for the only family he had left. The judge entered, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes softened only by the lines of long experience. "Court is now in session," she said, her gavel striking once. The state's attorney rose first. "Your Honor, this case is clear. Two minors, previously homeless, now caught in the orbit of a corporate magnate. However well-meaning Mr. Reed may be, he is not a parent. These children require stability, not experiments." The words landed like stones. Jonathan clenched his jaw, but he waited. Then his own counsel, a lean attorney named Thomas Carter, unrelated to Lily, stood. "Your Honor, we will prove that Jonathan Reed not only provides stability, but offers these children something far greater, a permanent home." Lily sat on the bench behind Jonathan, her hands gripping Ethan's tightly. She wore a simple dress, her hair tied back, but her eyes were fierce. Ethan leaned against her, confused but trusting. The hearing moved swiftly. Caseworkers testified about Lily and Ethan's months on the street, about Lily selling newspapers to survive. They painted her as resourceful but dangerously vulnerable. Then came Jonathan's turn. He rose, buttoning his jacket, and stepped to the witness stand. The courtroom hushed. "Mr. Reed," his attorney began, "why are you here today?" Jonathan's voice was steady. "Because these children are not statistics. They are not burdens. They are Lily and Ethan Carter. And they are my family." The state's attorney pounced. "Family? Mr. Reed, you met them scarcely weeks ago. Do you expect this court to believe you can replace years of parental absence?" Jonathan did not flinch. "I don't claim to replace anyone. Their mother loved them until her last breath. What I can do is honor her legacy by ensuring they never face the cold alone again." He paused, then reached into his briefcase. From it, he drew the old photograph he had once shown Lily, the boy he once was, clutching a newspaper after his mother's funeral. "This was me at 12, he said, his voice quieter now. "My mother died, and my father disappeared into business. I learned early what it means to be invisible to the world. That's why when I saw Lily standing in the snow with newspapers in her arms, I recognized her. I saw myself, and I swore I would not let history repeat itself." The judge studied him intently. The courtroom was silent except for the shuffle of papers. Then, unexpectedly, Lily rose from her seat. Her small figure looked fragile in the vast room, but her voice carried with striking clarity. "Your Honor," she said, "can I speak?" The judge hesitated, then nodded. Briefly. Lily walked to the front, her hand still clutching Ethan's. She looked at the bench of adults, lawyers, caseworkers, strangers who had never seen her until today, and lifted her chin. "We don't need another house or another caseworker," she said. "We need home. Mr. Reed didn't just give us food or books. He listens. He makes mistakes." Her lips quirked faintly, like burning eggs. "But he tries. And when Ethan was scared, he didn't yell. He just held him." She swallowed, her voice trembling. "He doesn't see us as numbers. He sees us. That's why I believe him when he says we're family. Because for the first time, I feel like we are." The courtroom was utterly still. Even the state's attorney faltered, shuffling papers nervously. Ethan, encouraged by his sister, piped up, his voice small but sure. "He's my dad. I called him that. And I want him to be." Jonathan's throat closed. He fought to remain composed, but the tears shimmering in Lily's eyes and the trust in Ethan's voice undid the walls he had built for decades. The judge leaned back, exhaling slowly. Her gaze moved from the children to Jonathan, weighing not only the legal arguments, but the truth laid bare in this fragile moment. "This court has heard enough," she said at last. "A decision will be rendered after due consideration." Her gavel struck, dismissing the hearing. Jonathan turned, his pulse pounding, and met Lily's eyes. For the first time since the revelation of her mother's dismissal, there was no fury there, only a fragile, trembling hope. He knelt so he was level with both children. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "you are not alone. Not anymore." Lily's hand, still holding Ethan's, hesitated. Then she reached forward, resting her other hand on Jonathan's. "Don't break your word," she said. Jonathan nodded, his voice breaking. "Never." And for the first time, Lily believed him. The verdict came on a cold February morning. Snowflakes swirled outside the courthouse windows, dissolving against the glass as if the city itself were holding its breath. Jonathan sat with Lily and Ethan at his side, their small hands clasped tightly in his. The judge adjusted her glasses, her voice measured yet warm. "Having considered the evidence, the testimony of the children, and Mr. Reed's commitment, the court hereby grants full guardianship of Lily Carter and Ethan Carter to Jonathan Reed." The gavel struck once. For a moment, silence filled the courtroom. Then Ethan let out a squeal of joy, throwing his arms around Jonathan's neck. Lily stood straighter, her jaw set in pride, but her eyes shimmered, betraying the tears she had fought to hide. Jonathan bent to meet her gaze. "We're going home," he whispered. That evening, the black car rolled through the quiet streets of Westchester, far from the noise of Manhattan. It turned into the driveway of a brick house that had stood empty for years. Jonathan's childhood home. He had purchased it back from the estate, restoring it not as a monument to loneliness, but as a place for new beginnings. Warm light glowed through its windows. Inside, the house smelled of fresh paint and cedar. The floors gleamed, and the old fireplace crackled with life for the first time in decades. Jonathan led the children through the door. "This was my home once," he said quietly. "It's ours now." Ethan darted from room to room, his laughter echoing through hallways that had once known only silence. He stopped at the staircase, his small hands brushing the polished banister as though claiming it as his own. Lily lingered near the living room, her eyes fixed on the fireplace. A quilt lay folded across the sofa, and the golden glow of the flames danced against the glass of framed photographs Jonathan had already placed there, one of the three of them at St. Helena's, another of Ethan asleep against Jonathan's shoulder. She touched the edge of the quilt with cautious fingers. "It feels warm," she admitted softly. Jonathan stepped beside her. It is warm, because it's no longer just a house. It's a home. Dinner that night was imperfect. Pasta slightly overcooked, garlic bread nearly burned. Yet to Ethan, it was a feast. He sat at the table chattering about school, his words tumbling over each other with excitement. Jonathan listened, smiling, while Lily sat quieter, her fork poised carefully. She looked across the table at Jonathan as though measuring each detail, the way he leaned in to hear Ethan, the way he laughed without reservation. Finally, she spoke. You really gave up your company for us, didn't you? Jonathan paused. I didn't give up my company. I gave up the illusion that it mattered more than family. The truth is, I never really had a family. Until now. Lily's lips trembled, but she straightened, unwilling to let the emotion show. Then don't mess it up. Jonathan's laugh was soft, full of humility. I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure I don't. Later, when Ethan had fallen asleep upstairs, Jonathan found Lily in the study. She was curled in an armchair, a book open on her knees, the firelight brushing her face. Reading late? He asked gently. She looked up, her expression softer than he had ever seen it. I couldn't sleep. Too many thoughts. He sat across from her. Good thoughts or bad? Both, she admitted. She hesitated, then added, When my mom was alive, she used to tell me that one day someone would see me. Not just the papers I sold, or the way I took care of Ethan. She said someone would see me for who I really am. I thought she was wrong. Her voice wavered. But maybe she wasn't. Jonathan's chest tightened. He leaned forward, his voice firm but tender. She was right. I see you, Lily, and I will never stop seeing you. For the first time, Lily let the tears fall. She wiped them quickly, embarrassed. But Jonathan did not move closer or offer a handkerchief. He simply let her cry, respecting her pride, honoring her heart. When she finally looked at him again, her eyes glistened, but her smile was real. Thank you, she whispered. Weeks passed, and the house began to fill with life. Ethan's drawings decorated the refrigerator. Lily's books stacked on tables and shelves, spilling over like rivers of ink. Jonathan's office, once sterile, now carried traces of family. Photos, crayons forgotten on the desk, a small pair of sneakers left by the door. On Sunday evenings, they made it a ritual to eat dinner together, no matter what. Jonathan abandoned his phone and laptop, Lily set the table with meticulous care, and Ethan insisted on lighting the candles. They laughed when the bread burned, teased Jonathan about his clumsy cooking, and shared stories late into the night. The house, once silent, now glowed with golden light. One evening in March, Jonathan tucked Ethan into bed, pulling the quilt up to his chin. The boy yawned and mumbled, "Good night, Dad." Jonathan kissed his forehead, his heart swelling. "Good night, son." As he turned to leave, Lily's voice came softly from the doorway. "Good night, Dad," she said. Jonathan froze. Slowly he turned. Lily's eyes met his, steady and unflinching. It wasn't a test or a slip of the tongue. It was a choice. Emotion rose so swiftly in him he could hardly breathe. He crossed the room, pulling her gently into his arms. She stiffened for a second, then melted into the embrace. "I'll never let you go," he whispered. "I know," she replied. Outside, the wind rattled the bare branches of the trees, but inside, the Carter Reed home glowed with warmth. The golden light spilling from its windows was not just firelight. It was belonging, forged from pain, defiance, and the courage to trust again. Jonathan had built empires, lost fortunes, and commanded legions of men. But as he stood in the quiet of that house, with 2 children sleeping under his roof, he finally understood. True wealth was not counted in dollars or stock shares. It was counted in laughter around a table, in a boy calling him dad, in a girl finally daring to believe in home. And in that golden light, Jonathan Reed was not a CEO. He was a father. Thank you for staying with us until the very last page of this journey, a story not of wealth or power, but of love, second chances, and the true meaning of family. If this touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more stories of hope and healing.